Okay guys, so we're going to talk about food selection for your pets. You've gotten done assessing them and kind of figuring out their needs, like their age. Certain breeds are going to have higher requirements. Are they, let's say, a female that is lactating or getting ready to give birth? So you're going to look and assess all of those things along with doing your body condition score and weight. So now I'm going to bring you in. This is our feed room / my husband's shop. So we keep that separate from the barn. We can close this off so you don't let critters get in. That's one thing I'll tell you. You can spend all kinds of money on your food, but if you don't have a secure location, you can have issues. So again, rodents, insects, those kinds of things. And you always want to inspect that. So there have been times that I've gotten at the feed store, picked up a feed and opened it up and it had mold on it. So you do want to inspect everything and try to keep all of those insects and rodents away from it. The other thing is you want to make sure that your pets don't have free access to it, that they can gorge themselves and get sick, okay? So, and that can be for any of the ones that we were talking about. You do have some, like if you have some dogs and cats, so they can kind of self-regulate themselves, you can put some stuff out, but if you have it out open, they may end up getting into more than what they need. So you do want to think about that too. So this is the most contained area that we can keep it. And again, we can kind of monitor and watch to make sure that they don't get into, or any insects or rodents get into it. I'm going to start first with, we're going to talk about horses and goats, and then we're going to go and compare that to the dog and cat. So I'm going to go through all of those and talk about it. So starting with the horse, as I mentioned before, most all of my horses are what we consider geriatric. So that means they're older. So in that situation, I'm considering things that older horses have problems with. So they may not need the higher energy level or particularly the protein level, but they don't break it down, the proteins as well. Same thing with fiber, they have a harder time breaking that down. So you're going to find a lot of your geriatric diets for horses have a higher amount than what they really are if they're not exercising or doing a lot of things. There's some other things. So I think in one of ours that we talked about the importance of omega-3s, omega-6s. Not only is that good for their hair coat and that, but for older horses, it actually helps with those omega-3s, especially help with inflammation. And so I make sure, so like this is their senior diet, it says senior on it. That's one thing that you'll see is that it'll have that on there. It is what we call a pelleted feed. And this way it's easier for if they have some dental issues, it'll break it down really easily. For all of your animals, whether we're talking horses, goats, sheep, dogs, you name it, cattle, whatnot, cats, you always want to check their dental health. The first thing when I start to see weight being lost, I'm going to look to make sure that they've got their teeth, that there aren't any dental related issues. No, in horses, we're not going to brush their teeth like we do in the cat and dog, but we still are going to have a veterinarian check them on a fairly regular basis. And older horses, I'll even do it twice a year rather than just once a year. So I'm going to check that. Other things we'll be talking about later on in our next module, we'll be talking about healthcare, including parasite load. That's the other thing I'll look at is whether or not they have a high internal parasite load. So if I checked off all that on the list, then I'm going to be like, well, maybe they need to have something a little more processed, maybe digestively, they're not breaking things down. And so these pelleted feeds, these senior feeds are processed a little more that it's easier for that horse to break it down. But you'll see that we're looking at, again, with this particular diet, it's not a really high sugar diet. It's more a high fat diet. So you'll see it's got 14% protein, 8% fat, and 16% fiber. When we look at the cats, we're going to actually see that protein level double because they are truly carnivores. Horses, we're talking herbivores. We're also going to see 8%. We're going to see even higher in fat because they're going to even utilize it more. What we're going to see is probably about a fourth of in the fiber because, again, they don't really utilize the fiber in the cats. For dogs, we'll see probably a similar amount in the protein, maybe a little bit more. Fat-wise, we'll see a similar amount, maybe a little bit less. But then again, same thing in fiber, we'll see probably about half of it. So in dogs, you'll hear some people talk more that they're truly carnivores, but they're not like that for compared to cats. Honestly, over time, the way we have bred them and domesticated them, a lot of us kind of refer to them more as omnivores, just because they can process some of that additional carbohydrates and fats a little bit better, or carbohydrates and fiber a little bit better than your cats can. But your cats, truly, you're going to see a huge jump in that protein. But for horses, especially older horses, I'm really going to obsess about, not only, I don't want a high sugar diet because a lot of them have what we call insulin resistance. So that's like a type 2 diabetes. So they can't handle the sugar. The other thing is I'm going to make sure that they've got enough fiber because they need that fiber and they don't digest it as well. So I'm also going to look at that too. And then, like I said, instead of being able to use those sugars, I'm going to have to look at an alternative source of energy. Horses don't effectively use that protein for energy. So when we talk about supplying energy to a horse, we do not do that through the protein. It's more the fats and, more importantly, your carbohydrates and, sugar, starches, you name it. But if I have a horse like that has insulin resistance, I have to depend more on that fat. Okay. So one of the things I do with my senior horses, I also even supplement with additional fat. It also, if you notice, has those omega-3s, which is so important for inflammation along with skin and coat. The other thing this one has is it has probiotics. So digestively, they'll start to have some problems. When they do, as they get older, what we'll end up seeing is they can't break down a lot of those carbohydrates, starches, and fibers quite as well. So this will help with gut health over all those probiotics, okay? So I will top dress with this, and we're going to talk about supplementing for a dog and cat versus a horse. So here I would top dress that feed. It's just a powder, and I would top dress it with such. Other things I supplement with is joints. So we do see in dogs and cats, a lot of times they'll have, particularly dogs, will have some joint related issues. We'll end up more turning, instead of supplements, we may end up giving them like some type of arthritic type of oral medication. With horses, we kind of start with first doing some type of supplement. So this is MSM. You might see glucosamine. Some pet owners will, instead of top dressing that food, would just give a pill of like glucosamine for their dog. Eventually, for the dogs and horses and that, we may get to some other types of treatments such as joint therapy. We may be doing some type of acupuncture, you name it, to kind of help them along the way. But a lot of times we don't see as much the top dressing like we see in the horses and the dogs. We may see a pill that you shove into like a hot dog or something to that effect. Other things, like I said, with our horses, a lot of times they will start to, as they get older, have digestive issues. And so this is another form of a digestive aid that kind of helps with them. So we'll see that a lot of times. You may see it also in dogs and cats. But like I said, a lot of times you don't have to top dress with it. They'll already just look for that senior type of diet. Now compare that to my goats. So the feed looks very similar. This is a generic livestock feed. So it has a horse. You can have a horse, a cow. You see the goats on here, and you see it looks very similar to what we looked at before. But the one thing I kind of want to point out to you is you can see, first of all, it only has, so it's got a little less protein. So it's at 12% versus 14. I'm not really concerned with, remember again, with horses, even goats and that, I'm not looking at the protein as much, getting the energy as those carbohydrates, starches, whatnot, and then fat. But again, if I have an older horse that doesn't break down that protein as well, we may lose even more than this 12%. So that's where that senior comes in. So, but for our goats and that, 12% is fine. The other thing is, you'll notice on this, it is what we refer to as a sweet pellet. So it's going to be top dressed with some molasses. They like that. And it's a little more sugary, so it kind of encourages them to eat. But for a horse that has insulin resistance, that's going to be a problem. So your geriatric horses, we're going to watch that. It is, you'll see, they're going to advertise with all of these, what they say, fiber rich, because in all of our livestock, since we're talking herbivores, horses, goats, you name it, cattle, we're going to be looking for fiber is going to be important. So again, that's something you'll see different than when we move to our dogs and cats, okay? Now, if I have an older horse that's having digestive issues where they're not getting enough fiber, not breaking it down, I can top dress it with some chopped hays or whatever. So here, this is a mix of alfalfa. This is a higher nutritional component of a hay. Alfalfa is a lot higher than, let's say, Bermuda or coastal grass. So I can top dress just to give it a little more. It's chopped up, so it makes it easier for them to digest. You can get these also in pelleted forms if you're trying to get that additional, or even cube forms. The other thing, if I'm trying to get a little more fiber, I can top dress with, this is beet pulp. And again, you can see here, so again, if I want it, it's a little shredded up. If I'm really having horses, maybe they have dental issues or anything like that, I can actually soak it down. And so again, that's one thing that I can do. So you see kind of the obsession with fiber with our herbivores, and then we get to our dogs and cats and we have less of that particular issue, okay? So moving on to our pets now, you saw with all of my cats and dogs, they're all kind of that middle age. They just moved out of their puppy phase. So you would have seen, and even my kitten phase, you would have seen kitten diet and puppy diet, but now they moved out of it. In fact, for the puppy diet for my Great Pyrenees, I actually selected a large breed puppy diet just to get them to slow their growth down too fast. That's where we see a lot of that joint related issues because of that. But now we're not asking a lot of them. They're not really doing much. So half the time they're laying around, and they're at that middle age. So they're not geriatric. They are all fixed, so they're not having babies. And so we really can go with just kind of a basic diet, a complete balanced basic diet, okay? And so one of the things, so you'll see, like, you can see just some of the generic names on here. This is some that I've used before with my Great Pyrenees. I like the omega-6. Not as much for, I'm worried about the fat content as I was curious, you know, their coat. They've got a beautiful hair on them, and so I wanted to add a little more to it. So really that's about all you're looking at. The one thing to note is in cats and dogs, top dressing, a lot of times they'll sort through on that. Horses are bad, but they're not as bad as your dogs and cats. And so usually what we're going to do is just buy the food that really has everything in it, okay? And there are a lot of your horse foods that you can buy them all in there, but you're not going to see a lot of us top dressing on top of all of this. So when they talk about, and I think one of our videos talked about supplementation, what you're doing is supplementing by buying a feed that's directed towards, a diet that's directed towards that particular animal. So top dressing additional on top of it, like I was showing you in the horse, I'm really not going to do as much on that. I'm just going to buy, if I want to worry about their coat, I'm going to focus on like buying something that has omega-6 or things like that. Big thing is, so as I mentioned before, the beet pulp, if I had bad teeth, or a horse had bad teeth, I might soak it down. Here we can actually buy moist diets. So like this semi-moist, this little packets, it's really nice and kind of soft. And so it's easy for them to kind of chew on that. Really, I can see it out there. Or we can do, for example, in cats or in dogs, the canned food. So here's the cat, and you can see right there, nice and soft, okay? What that does, it has a lot of moisture in it. And so if you've got, let's say, an older animal where you don't think they're getting as much moisture in them, or they're not getting as much water content, I may switch to this older, especially if they have poor teeth. So I had this really around. I started feeding these packets to my older dogs just because they were having a little more difficulty with eating some of the hard stuff. I wasn't seeing them drinking them as much. Same thing with the cats. I had one that was losing several teeth. She was just older. She almost got to 20 years old. So then I had that available for her. So the biggest thing is if you start feeding some of these, soft, moist diets, you do need to keep in mind you're feeding them a lot of more moisture than anything else. You want to make sure you're still getting that nutrient value in. And so there's ways that, and I think I have on the slides how you can calculate that information out. And there are some calculators you can do actually that online that you can pick from. But again, that's something you need to consider. The other thing is from a dental health perspective, chewing on that harder food can kind of help, especially I know with like dogs, but even cats. The other thing is then from a defecation standpoint, you're going to look at runnier feces with the softer here. So those are some of the things that you have to consider. Now, as we look at the dog food, a couple of things. So this particular food, this is just kind of an adult complete nutrition. You're looking at 18%, so just a little bit higher than my senior there. Again, remember we're talking, people go back and forth, carnivore. A lot of are saying the more we domesticate it, we consider them omnivores. But no matter what, they're looking more at that protein, actually for them being more an efficient form of energy. And so they're utilizing that more than, let's say, in the horse, where we're focused on the fats and the carbohydrates and whatnot. The other thing, you will see they've got 8% fat, so that's very similar to what we saw in the horse. And then you come down to fiber, it's only at like 5%. So again, much less, less than half than what we saw in the horse feed there. So we're not going to really use a lot of that fiber there. Mostly the fiber in our cat and dogs is just for digestive flow, getting it out, good colon intestinal health more than anything else. So that's more of what we're seeing in there. It's a lot harder to get a lot of that energy off of that. As you look at, so most all of you have had dog food, so you can get them in different shapes, sizes, whatnot. Some of them you can, like the gravy train, you can add the water to it. If you want to try to get the water in there, if it's a really kind of a dry type of food. You can even top dress, like with my older animals, I even top dress with just some gravy on there, just to get them to eat a little more. But again, there's preference. So now, you know, some dogs, my Great Pyrenees, are really picky about their food. So I have to be very selective on what I get. And so again, just kind of realize some of them, because it doesn't do you any good to buy good food and then they won't eat it. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. As we look to the cat, which you'll see, and so this is just a basic cat food. You'll see very similar. Notice that the pieces are a little smaller. Now, if I had smaller dogs, I might actually have a smaller diet that is smaller pieces, okay? So this here might be a little bit too big for, you know, a Chihuahua or a Corgi or something to that effect. But my Great Pyrenees, even my, you know, Border Collie, that's fine. But the cats, you're going to see it's the smaller pieces here. Again, you see it in different shapes and sizes and that. Cats usually like to keep pretty consistent on their food. So once you start them, they don't like a lot of changes overall. So find a good food that has what you want and then stick with it, okay? And again, biggest things on your cats that you got to worry about, for example, kidney related issues. So again, that's where that water content kind of helps to flush those kidneys, but you may have to watch for that. That's a common problem that we see there that you have to kind of keep in mind there. Big thing here, this is 30% protein. So that's a huge jump from everything else, from these down here, okay? And then it's, you know, a fourth or less than a half when it comes to particularly the fiber, okay? And then fat's pretty similar across the board between the two. Finally, I'm going to talk just a little bit about trying to keep your pet at a healthy weight. It's so easy to want to give them little snacks and treats. I'll be really honest, we do have this, but we're actually using this for training our dogs right now on the leash. So it's a little reward there, but again, we're not doling it out 24/7. Watch, it's really easy with table scraps and with snacks to start overfeeding, and then we look at obese animals. So you do want to really be careful about that. Now, a good thing you can, this is not an example of it, but like if you're concerned about like dental health and you want to give your dog a treat, get some dog bones. That'll actually help with their teeth. I know with the horses, we actually, for our senior horses, have a senior snack, and it's a little, you know, it's a treat for the horses, and it actually has joint supplement within it. The other thing we give our horses is carrots, for example, and fresh carrots with a lot of water content to it. Again, that keeps them hydrated. So again, think about all these different things as you're assessing. There's some great sources online, and you want to consider those too.